Greetings. Greetings, comrades and friends, and welcome back to Working Class Revolt. I'm your host, Dust James, the Marxist Leninist trucker, coming to you live from my humble home in rural North Carolina. I'm joined, as always, with my good friend and co host from down under, Australian labor organizer, David Fox. How are things today?
I'm very good for a Sunday morning here in Australia.
Right on. So we're very honored to be joined with two great guests. I'm starting off fellow member of the Center for Political Innovation and Bolivian National, Carlos Laguna-Driscoll. Welcome. How are you this evening?
Really good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Right on. So one of my more popular guests, Xiangyu, the Bolshevik rapper. Welcome. How are you this evening?
Doing great. How are you? Thanks for having me on. How's everyone doing?
Awesome. All right. So we got our introductions underway. Now, today is going to be a study session. We like to do work meetings and study sessions, and we're going to be going over a piece from We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation educational manual. And we're going to be going over, if people want to follow along, on page 152. We will be reading aloud and discussing on page 152, section 3.2, report on an investigation of the peasant uprising in Hunan province by Mao Zedong. And it says in here 1928, but I was just recently informed from Comrade Xiangyu that is 1927. Xiangyu, maybe if you want to give us a little bit of linguistic note or maybe a little bit of background on the piece before we get started.
So, yeah, unless you're some sort of linguistic nerd or you have knowledge of you've studied Chinese to a certain capacity, you might not realize that Mandarin, the way Mandarin's been romanized has changed over the years. Around the time until when the People's Republic of China was established in the 1950s, they developed a new system of romanization called Hanyu Pinyin. But it was only used internally until the 80s because out of respect for foreigners like who read English publications, they were used to the old the old romanizations. So just to keep things consistent, at least for a while. But then in the 1980s, they decided, okay, we're going to switch outward facing foreign language publications to the new system as well. And since these the works of Mao were translated into English in the 60s and 70s, and it kind of the old spellings kind of got grandfathered in, so it's kind of confusing because you might look at you might read some things and see like Hu Pei, or it's spelled Hu Pei, but it's actually supposed to be Hu Bei, just like it doesn't matter how it's spelled, it's supposed to be the same. And you might look on a Chinese map and you're just like, where the hell is this Hu Pei? So when we come across different place names, like geographic locations and the names of people, I might just kind of chime in and just be like, okay, well this is how it's pronounced. And if you're interested in the new spelling, I could give it. Yeah, so it was, the old spellings were really inconsistent. They had like ones they used Wade Giles for most things, like the names of people, but then geographic locations, they had this system called the postal system, which was kind of just basically foreigners from like different countries kind of just sounding out what they heard. That's where you get things like Canton and Peking and Tian, like I don't, yeah, or Chungking, that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Yes. Can you also give us a little bit of background on the piece as well?
Oh, basically it's Mao just kind of doing using the Marxist theory he learned and analyzing the situation in Hunan province, which is where he's from. He did a lot of local organizing in that area in his early years. So
I think it's also interesting to note that this is 1927. This is way before the communist revolution. This is a younger Mao. This is before the great. He's already had much success. In organizing. The masses, but it isn't. He's still leading up to that great moment of victory. When the communists take power. in China, and he's still, just as dedicated and strong and to the point. Maybe if we can have a round of, if people want to say anything to introduce the piece, Comrade Fox or Carlos.
Can I say something?
No.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Xiangyu.
So you guys didn't seem to have much to say. So the one we're reading today is a very abridged version. Now it basically covers a lot of the important concepts, but if you are curious and you want to kind of just read the full version, I don't know how many pages it is in English, but the Chinese original is like 32 pages. It's on Marxist.org. Just search report on an investigation of the peasant uprising in Hunan province.
Very important. So go ahead.
I was just going to comment too. A lot of Mao Zedong's works. I also highly recommended reading his works on the 4 and 5 essays on philosophy and on contradictions as well. There's some excellent works. They're short pieces and really they're written in a way that's easily understood. I'll say it doesn't get that complicated at all. It's quite straightforward. And I think that was amazing with Mao Zedong. He wrote it in such a way that everyone could understand. It's not just like academic or it's completely off the chart. It's off our radar. It's something we can actually absorb at a time. So when I'm reading some of these works, this is a good introduction to it. However, to further reading, and it is on Marxist.org, and you can actually order a lot of his works as well online. I highly would recommend those further readings as well.
It's you know how a lot of times people say, well, the way theory is written is very inaccessible to the people, and that might be true when it comes to like postmodern, like academia stuff that you see today from like the fake left that you see. But if you just read Mao, you'll realize even in the Chinese original, it's written in a way that it could be read out loud to illiterate peasants, and they'll get a grasp of the ideas. That's a very important thing to do, to learn how to take complicated ideas and just express them in layman's terms. So yeah, how you do propaganda.
All right, so we're going to be reading this piece aloud and then have a discussion. I'll start with the first paragraph, and I guess we'll go around, maybe David, Xiangyu, and then Carlos, and we'll finish it up. So here we go. And also, Xiangyu, if you said, if we come across a proper name of a place or person, we'll refer to you on pronunciation.
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay. So I'll begin. In the 32 days from January 4th to February 5th, I called together fact-finding conferences in villages and country towns, which were attended by experienced peasants and by comrades working in the peasant movement. And I listened attentively to their reports and collected a great deal of material. Many of the hows and whys of the peasant movement were the exact opposite of what the gentry in
Hankou
and
Changsha
are saying. I saw and heard of many strange things of which I had hitherto been unaware. I believe the same is true of many other places too.
All talk directed against the peasant movement must be speedily set right. All the wrong measures taken by the revolutionary authorities concerning the peasant movement must be speedily changed. Only thus can the future of the revolution be benefited. For the present upsurge of the peasant movement is a colossal event.
Am I next or is Carlos next?
Either way.
Okay, I guess I'll go. In a very short time, in China's central, southern, and northern provinces, several 100 million peasants will rise like a mighty storm, like a hurricane, a force so swift and violent that no power, however great, will be able to hold it back. They will smash all the trammels that bind them and rush forward along the road to liberation. They will sweep all the imperialists, warlords, corrupt officials, local tyrants, and evil gentry into their graves. Every revolutionary party and every revolutionary comrade will be put to the test, to be accepted or rejected as they decide. There are three alternatives: to march at their head and lead them, to trail behind them, gesticulating, is that how you pronounce this word?
Yes.
Gesticulating and criticizing, or to stand in their way and oppose them. Every Chinese is free to choose, but events will force you to make the choice quickly. Popcorn Carlos.
A revolution is not a dinner party, or writing an essay, or painting a picture, or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. A rural revolution is a revolution by which the peasantry overthrows the power of the feudal landlord class. Without using the greatest force, the peasants cannot possibly overthrow the deep-rooted authority of the landlords, which has lasted for thousands of years. The rural areas need a mighty revolutionary upsurge, for it alone can arouse the people in their millions to become a powerful force.
A man in China is usually subjected to the domination of three systems of authority. 1. The state system, political authority, ranging from the national, provincial, provincial, and county government, down to that of the township. 2. The den system, clan authority, ranging from the central ancestral temple and its branch temples down to the head of the household. And 3. The supernatural system, religious authority, ranging from the king of hell down to the town and village gods belonging to the netherworld, and from the emperor of heaven down to all the various gods and spirits belonging to the celestial world. As for women, in addition to being dominated by these three systems of authority, they are also dominated by men, the authority of the husband. These four authorities, political, clan, religious, and masculine, are the embodiment of the whole feudal patriarchal system and ideology, and are the four thick ropes binding the Chinese people, particularly the peasants.
How the peasants have overthrown the political authority of the landlords in the countryside has been described above. The political authority of the landlords is the backbone of all the other systems of authority. With that overturn, the clan authority, the religious authority, and the authority of the husband will begin to totter. My mistake. Where the peasant association is powerful, the den elders and administrators of temple funds no longer dare oppress those lower in the clan hierarchy or embezzle clan funds. The worst clan elders and administrators, being local tyrants, have been thrown out. No one any longer dares to practice the cruel corporal and capital punishments that used to be inflicted in the ancestral temples, such as flogging, drowning, and burying alive.
Hi, James. Sorry. The old rule barring women and poor people from the banquets in the ancestral temples has also been broken. The women of Baiguo and Hengshan County gathered in force and swarmed into their ancestral temple, firmly planted their backsides in the seats, and joined in the eating and drinking, while the venerable den bigwigs had willy-nilly to let them do as they pleased. At another place where poor peasants had been excluded from the from temple banquets, a group of them flocked in and ate and drank their fill, while the local tyrants and evil gentry and other long-gowned gentlemen all took to their heels in fright.
Everywhere, religious authority totters as the peasant movement develops. In many places, the peasant associations have taken over the temples of the gods as their offices. Everywhere, they advocate the appropriation of temple property in order to start peasant schools and to defray the expenses of the associations, calling it public revenue from superstition.
It's pronounced the way it's spelled.
Okay. In Liling County, prohibiting superstitious practices and smashing idols have become quite the vogue. In its northern districts, the peasants have prohibited the incense burning processions to propitiate the god of pestilence. There were many idols in the Taoist temple at
Fuboring in Lukou.
But when extra room was needed for the district headquarters of the
Kuomintang, or the KMT.
They were all piled up in a corner, big and small together, and no peasant raised any objection. Since then, sacrifices to gods, the performance of religious rites, and the offering of sacred lamps have rarely been practiced when a death occurs in the family, because the initiative in this matter was taken by the chairman of the peasant association.
Sun Xiaoshan.
He is hated by the local Taoist priest in the
Longfeng Nunnery.
in the north, 3rd district. The peasants and primary school teachers chopped up wooden idols and actually used the wood to cook meat. More than 30 idols in the
Dongfu.
monastery in the south district were burned by students and peasants together, and only 2 small images of the Lord Pao were snatched by an old peasant who said, "Don't commit a sin."
In places where the power of the peasants is predominant, only the older peasants and the women still believe in the gods, the younger peasants no longer doing so. Since the latter control the associations, the overthrow of religious authority and the eradication of superstition are going on everywhere. As to the authority of the husband, this has always been weaker among the poor peasants, because out of economic necessity, their womenfolk have to do more manual labour than the women of the richer classes, and therefore have more say and greater power of decision in family matters. With the increasing bankruptcy of the rural economy in recent years, the basis for men's domination over women has already been weakened.
With the rise of the peasant movement, the women in many places have now begun to organize rural women's associations. The opportunity has come for them to lift up their heads, and the authority of the husband is getting shakier every day. In a word, the whole feudal patriarchal system and ideology is tottering with the growth of the peasants' power. At the present time, however, the peasants are concentrating on destroying the landlord's political authority. Wherever it has been wholly destroyed, they are beginning to press their attack in the 3 other spheres of the clan: the gods and male domination.
But such attacks have only just begun, and there can be no thorough overthrow of all 3 until the peasants have won complete victory in the economic struggle. Therefore, our present task is to lead the peasants, to put their greatest efforts into the political struggle, so that the landlord's authority is entirely overthrown. The economic struggle should follow immediately, so that the land problem and the other economic problems of the poor peasants may be fundamentally solved. As for the den system, superstition, and inequality between men and women, their abolition will follow as natural consequence of victory in the political and economic struggles. If too much of an effort is made arbitrarily and prematurely to abolish these things, the local tyrants and evil gentry will seize the pretext to put about such counter-revolutionary propaganda as the Peasant Association has no piety towards ancestors, the Peasant Association is blasphemous and is destroying religion, and the Peasant Association stands for the communization of wives, all for the purpose of undermining the peasant movement.
A case in point is the recent events at second to last paragraph.
Oh, sorry. I was looking at something else. At Xiangxiang or Xiang County,
In Hunan and
Yangxin,
in
Hubei.
where the landlords exploited the opposition of some peasants to smashing idols. It is the peasants who made the idols, and when the time comes, they will cast the idols aside with their own hands. There is no need for anyone else to do it for them prematurely.
The Communist Party's propaganda policy in such matters should be draw the bow without shooting, just indicate the motions. It is for the peasants themselves to cast aside the idols, pull down the temples to the martyred virgins and the arches to the chaste and faithful widows. It is wrong for anybody else to do it for them.
It's a very powerful piece. Maybe we get a round of initial reactions. And if people want to go back and they want to watch my recent blog of Anti-Imperialist America, it was basically on the same subject, which I called the property question. And there's a good quote from Marx, what I said, which has been going around a lot, but it's only the first part that seems to be quoted, and the second part seems to be left out. Is that Marx says that communists should support all revolutions that go against the social order of the social and political order of things. And then the very next sentence it says, and you go there and you bring forth the property question as the primary question. And I think that this is exactly what it's talking about. And I gave the example of in Afghanistan, the U.S. imperialists used the justification of saying that the Afghans have backward social practices, when in reality, when the economy advances in Afghanistan and the economic oppression is lifted and the people in Afghanistan are able to develop how they see fit, they will develop their own social practices as they see fit and will not be imposed by an imperialist force. And I also gave the example of the South. And in the United States, there's a lot of anti-rural bigotry, especially from liberals who look down and call people with subpar education and subpar services and look down at rural people as being backwards or hillbillies or rednecks. And they act like they're beneath them when if we were able to advance our educational system and develop, better economic opportunities, improve our lives, then we can develop our social understanding, advance as well. And I think it's a really good piece. It's very revolutionary. I think he talks straight down to earth. He's way ahead of his time. This is a very short, abridged piece, and I think there's a lot you can get from this small section. Maybe if we could go to Carlos, what is your initial response to the section?
There's just so much in here. There's the famous "a revolution is not a dinner party" quote. But what really stood out to me was two things. One was what you were just talking about, that last part where he talks about basically that, if too much of an effort is made arbitrarily and prematurely to abolish certain reactionary tendencies amongst the peasantry, that it could backfire. And he was basically saying that we need to meet the working class where they are. I thought that was very profound. And it does have some relevance to getting some of the more liberal people in our country to kind of think twice before they say some really nasty things about our Southern brothers and sisters, But really what stood out to me was when he mentioned the three systems of authority that affect men in China. And then he goes on to say that for women, in addition to these three systems of authority, they also are subjected to a fourth, which is domination by men or their husbands. And, this is 1927. Like you were saying, this is just incredibly ahead of its time. And I think just the way he presents these issues clearly is just really incredible.
Comrade Fox.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's actually too. He put it to the rest of the comrades in the Communist Party. I said, you've got three choices. You can heed and lead them, or trail behind them, gesticulating, criticising, or stand in the way to oppose them. That's the three ultimate choices you've got. And I think because there was a lot of upheaval within the countryside, that it was basically the choice out there. And what I found, even just within this little reading piece, the fact is also too, he's also talking about the dialectical relationship, if you with the superstructure and economic base of the countryside, and how it was changing. And even when he mentioned about the domination of men, especially amongst the poorer peasants, is less because their economic circumstances is pretty much equal to the rest of the women, and it shows you how he actually applied scientific socialism to the prevailing material conditions of the time in China, unlike where a lot of other places, and it's not been criticism or anything, but a lot of them still thought, no, we have to do what the Comintern said, and he says, no, this does not apply to the current prevailing material conditions. We have to do it differently here in this country. And it was it's how he's written this is it's quite good. It's just like really down to earth, and it's like it's just like grounded everyday concrete reality. It's not just a pipe dream or someone's idea. This is what he's been observing, what he's been reported on, and what he's been experiencing. So it's really hands-on stuff.
Brother Xiangyu?
Oh, I think most of the things that need to be said have already been said. But one thing that really I'm reminded by reading this article again is how the way that there is this sort of establishment left that is being bred in the West, especially in the United States today, where kids go to universities and they learn all these theories, and I mean there's truth to a lot of them, but then they're not taught how to relate to the people and talk to the people. So then they'll just be like, oh, if you don't know this by now, then you're a terrible person and you're beyond saving, and like screw you, you're a lost cause. But the funny thing about these people is until they've like gone to college and entered their little radical liberal echo chambers, they didn't know about these things either. So it's not just what's the message that's being said, but how it's being communicated. And we need to we need to cast aside this sort of mentality where we just want to show people how advanced and how forward thinking and how progressive and how righteous we are. And what's the use of all these ideas if they're not being used to help people? Because you look at you read this article, you look at these like rural peasants and stuff. By holding on to improper ideas, they're screwing themselves over. But if you really want to save them, you need to get them to realize that you need to effectively communicate in a way that they can come to the conclusions and then change for the better to not only help themselves but help others. You know, it's meet people where they are, unless they're just absolutely unwilling to change and unwilling to reflect, and are just hopelessly reactionary. You meet them where they are, but you don't leave them where they were.
Great way of putting it.
Yeah, it's a lot of times I try to express this on Twitter, and the first thing that a lot of people, especially these the kind of people in the first world and the imperial core, they're just jumping to the conclusion saying, "Oh, are you saying that we need to form alliances with neo-Nazis?" And I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. But I mean, most people in the most people in society, they take the path of least resistance in their political development. And if you don't and if you make them feel like they're dumb pieces of shit, they're not going to want to listen to you. Sorry for putting it that bluntly, but that's just the way it is. And you know how people at the same time, there are people who say things like, well, it is not the job of it is not the job of POC to educate like rural white people. And that's true. I agree with that. But then if it's not their job, then whose job is it? But then you also have these white liberals who are just like, oh, these people are beyond saving. Screw them. I'm not one of them. I'm like I'm just going to performatively express my white guilt while and they totally ignore this numbers game. And it's like, well, you're not gonna do shit with your white guilt if like a lot of these people are just not willing to listen to you, are you? So revolution is not a dinner party. This stuff is hard work. It sucks. It's grueling. It's a lot of trial and error. You're gonna meet setbacks. You're going to experience certain failures. Yeah.
Powerful. We were going to start the questions, but man, that you just brought up like a lot of topics right there. I think we can maybe have a little bit more of a discussion. I recently tweeted out and sent out on Facebook a video of formerly Stokely Carmichael Conway Ture, and he was talking to the so-called white allies of his day. And he was basically trying to say, leave us alone and go deal with your own people. But he essentially said, he was telling other white leftists should be organizing the poor, should be organizing poor white people. and he says it straight out to him. And it's interesting. The last line when he says to white leftists, "Go organize the white poor," he says, "Teach them about economics and teach them how they are being exploited. And then through their struggle against the monopoly capitalists in the larger system, they will learn about racism. They'll learn about national oppression." Let's see, Carlos, if there's a lot of ideas here, any response to this theme here?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely really relevant for discussions today, because we talk about these tendencies, these kind of like anti-worker tendencies amongst liberals, but there are a lot of people, and definitely my experience on Twitter is the same. A lot of people where if you say, hey, we should maybe be organizing working class people in the South and in the United States and the imperial core, you get a lot of people that claim that they're communists, and they get really upset at that. It's like the crowd that says everything with 3 Ks, like communist and all that. But yeah, I think fundamentally as communists, it's our, like Xiangyu was saying, it's not people of color's responsibility necessary to educate white people, but as communists, it's our responsibility. I think that's really important to remember.
Another thing that that just I got reminded of while you were talking is people will read things like Gramsci, and like they'll rightfully say, oh, there is a ruling class ideology, right? And there's a ruling class ideology. We live in America. It is an imperialist country. It is a white supremacist country. It is capitalist. It is a lot of terrible things. And by nature of living in a reactionary society, you're going to internalize reactionary ideas, whether or not you want them. I mean, you can actively struggle with them, but you're never immune from them. Let me give an example. I mean, as a impressionable teenager, you turn on the TV and like, yeah, you might hear your parents telling you, parents and teachers and whatnot telling you the objectification of women is bad, and it is. But then you turn on the TV and you see it being glorified, and that's just the patriarchal society kind of just spreading its propaganda, and it's hard to not internalize some of that just growing up, as like as an adolescent boy or adolescent girl. It changes the way you look at other people and the way you look at yourself. And Carlos, I was just wondering, you used to work in the kitchen, right?
I did, yeah.
I do work in the kitchen, and I was just I don't know, did you work with were there any like South American immigrants who worked in the kitchen?
Oh yeah, I worked with a lot of actually
same.
Ecuadorians and Guatemalans, and
it's just be honest with me. Is it normal if, like, let's say like somebody spills something, or like a lot of orders come in? It's very normal for expletives like puta to just be yelled, right?
Oh, 100%.
Now,
yeah.
if some college kid just walks into the kitchen and said, "Oh my God, you can't say that. Don't you know how patriarchal puta is, and how you can't how you can't use that to imply that something is bad?" Do you think these people who have like a lot of them are undocumented immigrants? I'm not saying all, but I mean the ones I work with are, and
Right.
they've seen shit. They know what it's like to have their countries destabilized. They could be a huge asset to whatever revolutionary organizing you're going to do. But if you're going in and their first interaction with you is, "Oh, you're a terrible, terrible person for saying puta because somebody spilled hot soup on your shoe," they're not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I mean, it's not to say that there isn't a problem with like, male violence amongst the Latin population.
Or any
but
population.
We're not going to like cancel Latin men, it's like,
or just any population. But it's just an example because it just happened a few hours ago with me when I was at work. It just kind of, I'm not, and people who are trying to just kind of put words in my mouth, I'm not saying, okay, because we shouldn't do that, that means we should encourage everyone to go around like calling everybody puta. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Right. Just don't want to cast people out when they behave like that. Right.
It's not like they were born saying that. It's not like they're gonna die being that way either. But it's a whole revolutionary process. It's like Che Guevara said. It's the point of the socialism is to like to form a new what is it, like a new man, a new consciousness, a new just communist understanding and being and everything. And I'm like grossly paraphrasing, but he said something along those lines.
Right.
Let's see. What's David Fox? Anything to add before we move on to the questions?
I think it might as well. This is a great discussion because most of the important thing is if we're going to read from the masses to the masses, as Master Tung said, quoted one time, and so basically it's got it there. The masses, will, majority of the working people, there's got to be something they can relate to as well. Because we go in there using the language and like it's all academic and that you just lose them straight away. They're going to know what the hell is this guy on about, you know? And we've got to use it in simple language. It's easy language that's understood. And I know a lot of people can get quite academic about it as well, but that's great in academic circles. But however, we're actually going to talk about the common poor working people, and there's plenty of them out there, and there's going to be a lot more of them yet. That's where something where it's how to relate to them. And I think actually one thing it's what mostly focuses on, what's interesting about this article, but it's also about many of the articles, is we've got to keep focus on what's primary and not what's secondary. I mean, all secondary issues are important, but not what is actually primary. When I had this discussion in last Friday when we were celebrating, we had to do it via Zoom, celebrate an anniversary, a very historical anniversary. And what we explained with it, you know, how are we going to reach out to people and where can we get it? And I said, simple. We've got it right in the hands. It's staring us right in the face there. Economic. People are suffering economically in Australia. No doubt in America as well and elsewhere. We are suffering. You know, COVID-19's just fast forwarded everything in a million miles, but there's so much economic unsurety out there. People don't know if they've got a job. There's still people now not even receiving income, on the verge of losing their house or have already lost it altogether. You know, it's just escalating. It's like a big avalanche. It's from the snowflake that started a whole complete avalanche, and you can just see it. And this is a good time when we can actually go out and talk to people about the economic concerns, regardless of what the colour of the skin is. You know, because it does affect everybody. People have got to eat. People have got to live somewhere. Someone's got to have clothes on their body. You know, they've got to be able to have water and access some basic services in life. And that, and if they haven't got that for human survival, they know where they're going to be. And this is something widely important. I think this is a great conversation talking about because, yes, I've noticed that with a lot of, you know, kids, they come out there, they now and they're maybe all good intentions, but they're saying, oh, you're this, you're that, and everything else. It's just turning people off. They just cannot relate to what's going on the ground here, and that's where they've completely lost them. And unfortunately, like this country, like they have in America, this is where the rise of the popular right, like, you know, you've compassed in Trump over there. Here we've had it with Pauline Hanson and many others that filled that void because there's a simple reason where I'll just use the term the left have just basically abandoned the whole field altogether, and they come in with all this jargon and that. It's like it's completely people cannot relate to and is completely turned off by. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good discussion. We'll continue on to the questions. I'll start by reading and answering the first question. This is on page 157. Why were the peasants of China full of rage? And I think that's the same reason, you know, folks come home from work and they're mad. You know, they got to sit down and have a beer or put on the TV and decompress for a little bit. It's you know, me as a truck driver, I got the illusion like, you know, I ain't got a boss because I'm out on my own. The computer tells me where to go, and then I get out there and I do it. But something comes down, and I got to deal with the driver manager or the fleet manager. You talk to drivers, they hate the driver manager. The driver manager is the person that needs to tell you as smooth as possibly that things are fucked for you. But look at what the Chinese peasantry had to deal with. They got to deal with they got these, you know, they got the political system keeping them down, the clan, the tribal system keeping them down, and then the religious feudal-archy on top of that, and then, you know, sexism on top of that for women, and people just beat down and kept in their place. You got to think about, you know, it's the level of scarcity. So we live in a capitalist system, which is less repressive and more efficient than the feudal system. just like this is scientific socialism. Hunter-gatherers, slave societies, feudal societies, capitalist, and eventually socialist. So it's really the development of production that allows for more advanced systems. So they were in a position of far more scarcity, and because of that, more levels of repression on top of that, and that's why they were mad. So let's see if anybody want to add on that question.
Just a note. At one in one part of the article they talked about landlords. Now, when we think landlords, we think of like the person you pay to live in your house, right? So it's kind of interesting because the both of the words are translated into landlord in English, but the type of landlord that's mentioned in Mao's writings are called 地主, whereas the landlords that like you pay to live in your apartment or house, they're called 房东. Like 房东 is like the house owner, house lord kind of. Like these sort of the 地主, the type of landlords that they're talking about here. In this time, it's not just you pay to live in a house. It's more like these people have like their own private armies and they just pretty much run the whole place.
They were like feudal lords, right?
They are feudal lords, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's imagine how much you hate your landlord and times that by like you're the landlord that you hate is an angel compared to these sorts of the landlords mentioned in these writings by Mao. I'm not saying that they're good. I'm just saying imagine like it's unimaginable by people like us who haven't lived like in a semi-feudal semi-colony.
Yeah, I think a big part of the reason why there was such a violent reaction against landlords later on was just because of how brutal these people were.
Yeah.
I think it's just like you said. I don't think any of us could really truly understand. But think about your worst work day and then times that by 1,000,000. So
Well, when I was actually looking at the punishments that are applied to the people, the corporal and capital punishments used to be inflicted on the ancestral temples, such as flogging, drowning, and burying alive. I mean, it is just so backward doing that to anyone. I mean, there was no need for it as well. And I just think, no wonder people were just beaten down. You could beat people down to such a degree, but they will eventually be a powder keg situation, and they will retaliate, and they did it accordingly.
I just want to make a quick cultural note. It's important to avoid white supremacy, and that is that the feudal systems of Europe were equally exploitative, if not more so. And the idea that the century of humiliation that was imposed upon China by British imperialists that kept them underdeveloped and super exploited for the profits of the British Empire. It's very important to know. And I saw, I studied in college. I studied the peasant uprisings in Europe, and some of the same things were going on. There's a story in the French Revolution where it was a custom for a peasant when they walked by a feudal lord to put their head down and cross the street. That's what they had to do when they came in the presence of someone that was better than them on the feudal system. And when the feudal system started to break and peasant uprisings started to take place, they would, they'd go right beside them and say, hey, and look them in the eye. And they're like, oh, and then they get killed. And then, so on and so forth. Let's see, let's go on to the next question. Let's see, Brother Carlos, if you want to take the next question.
Sure. So why did previous peasant wars and uprisings throughout China and other feudal societies not lead to socialism? And, I think Mao kind of goes into it a little bit in this, or he kind of implies it, but I don't think that, previous uprisings or other feudal revolts really had the political or economic foundation really necessary for those movements to really succeed and just, overcome their feudal masters. So I think Mao does go into that in this article quite a bit. So.
without revolutionary theory, when it's just like a retaliation towards injustices, and those are perfectly justified.
Right.
They don't automatically lead to revolution. Revolutions aren't just completely spontaneous. You need to have you need to have a sort of you need to have the political, economic, and organizational basis for it to happen. It's kind of like
Okay.
how people were before Marx came along, when capitalism was kind of developing. A lot of people were angry at capitalists, and you had like Luddites breaking the machinery, but that didn't lead to socialism, did it?
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's
No.
kind of the same reasons.
I think this is an interesting question. These questions are written by members of the Center for Political Innovation, and and I think there's been there's been different peasant uprisings and peasant
Mm.
wars, and they haven't led to socialist revolution, but they
No.
had led to capitalist revolutions. There's a good book I recommend is Engels on the Peasant War in Germany. Is one I recommend for study. And it's interesting that the Europe had capitalist revolutions, and they largely had capitalist society, and then Protestantism overtook as a form of religion to uphold the emerging capitalist society. But in China, where they had been basically colonized and forced into poverty, the feudal systems had been held up by the British colonialists. And the same thing happened in India, where they didn't go in there and set up capitalism, and they didn't set up the capitalist social order. What they did was they funded and backed the caste system to help maintain colonialism. Let's see, Comrade Fox.
Well, that's actually good, and you've actually all raised some very interesting points. That it doesn't necessarily happen to lead to socialism. It depends on what the economic basis and circumstances are at the time, and the theory that needs to be applied with that as well. I mean, theory and practice are not separate; they're not. They both go together. And I'm looking at this as well. It's also too, I think, with any of the uprisings, that actually was some powerful lessons for the Chinese people to learn from. Okay, what went wrong the first time, what went wrong the second time, what went right, and that was all part of their learning experience. I mean, a great army didn't just happen to be great because it was there undefeated. It went through many defeats until it learned how to actually fight properly and effectively as well. So that's obviously this is this applies here as well. And the previous peasant wars and uprising throughout China and the other feudal societies not lead to socialism. Well, certainly, I mean, sometimes we'd all like to think, yes, it would lead to socialism, but not necessarily. It depends on what the circumstances are like. It depends on how well organised the poor are, and be in our case, the working class. And it's also, too, the question is, do people actually want economic change? That's going to be the question, and so that's all these things have got to be taken into account. I mean, in the history of our country, but also our respective countries and forebears and that, I mean, obviously they want, socialism, the term didn't come into about, I think, early 1800s. So, I mean, no one would have known before then what to do. I mean, they believed something had to change, but they could have actually changed within the system and that. So, yeah, it's always a good question to ask why and everything else, but it depends on what the system we had at the time. And I mean, also too, it also applied to when I mentioned the economic basis, also the technology at the time, industrialization, etc. But what was interesting, it could actually apply to the modern era. Then why would in the working class of the Western capitalist countries, be it in Europe, UK, and America, uprise and go against and form socialism either? So it's quite an extensive question when you're breaking it down, but it's depending on what the material conditions, and it's also depending on whether that ruling class, are they in a weakened position. It's not it's not only if they cannot rule anymore, but do the people still want to be ruled the old way? as well. So that's got to be a fundamental question, always keep in the back of the mind.
Let's see, Brother Xiangyu, if you could go on to the next question.
What is Mao Zedong urging the communists of China to do? Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
Basically, follow the mass line, and it reminds me a lot of times people, especially one of the main slogans, one of the most often repeated slogans by radical liberals today, and like all sorts of pseudo leftists, is listen to people's lived experiences, which is true. You should listen to lived experiences, but the thing is, individual lived experiences are they're not necessarily complete, and a lot of times what they do is they like to listen to like one or two lived experiences that like justify their preconceived notions, so then they don't have to do anything about whatever it is they're defending. Whereas the mass line is you're listening to lived experiences, but you're listening to like the lived experiences of the masses. And everyone in different who's going through different things in life, like in different or working in different parts of the economy or doing different jobs or whatever, they're going to the same they might see the same thing differently. And the job of communists is to take this all into account, analyze things, and figure out why people have certain ideas, and then figure out which ideas are correct, which ideas are incorrect, and kind of offer an explanation so they can kind of cater these sort of they can kind of tailor these sorts of solutions to people and tell them, hey, why is this relevant to you? Why is it in your interests to take part in a revolution, take part in a mass movement? It's kind of what Caleb likes to say, out of the movement and into the masses.
Right on. Right on. Great impression. Let's see. I mean, I'll give a more direct answer to the question. He says, support the political. You essentially harness these conditions that they're angry about, and support the political revolution, which will then bring about the economic revolution. And then there's a warning about don't criticize too much on social issues. See, any other ideas on this question?
Well, I think we should criticize social issues, but the problem is the you know how it's political economy, but I think one of the most clever things that they've done is kind of divorce politics from economy, and then limit everything. Like the thing about the thing about like the so-called like freedom of expression in America is a lot of times like the establishment, they this is kind of interesting. It just kind of dawned on me. You know how Mao talks about how you're supposed to like draw the arrow, but let the people you're trying to lead fire the bow. That's kind of what the establishment does with the fake left. Like it's not like, that's why it's like compared to like the censorship of other countries, like in America we feel like we're free, but I mean there are forces that kind of like direct people's anger and like make people act certain ways. Like you know what I'm getting at?
Yes.
Yeah. So and then I just lost my train of thought.
That's fine. And Comrade Fox or Carlos, anything further on what was just raised or this question?
I think just speaking to what Xiangyu was saying, if there are no real solutions offered to people, they're gonna be upset about genuine issues in their lives, right? But they're gonna find alternative reasonings and rationales for it, And so I think it's important, for us to really reach out to working class people, just like what Mao is basically telling communists in China to do. At this time, I think the Communist Party had really had a big focus and a big its power was really centered in cities, and so I think basically what he's trying to tell the Communist Party is, hey, we need to meet the masses of people, the peasantry, and the countryside.
It's powerful. I just want to mention, a little bit of the material conditions behind this story. I mean, or this where this is coming from. I mean, you think about Europe had already had capitalist revolutions, and developed capitalist societies, but a lot of the colonial war has been kept down, and they still have a lot of these feudal systems. At the same time that a capitalist class is emerging, so you have this, this contradiction between repressive feudal orders and the changing economic conditions. So, I mean, China was ripe with the potential for revolution. The peasants could see, the coming future, and they were getting a taste of, some goods, or being able to see, levels of industrialization. At the same time, their situation was so dire, and maybe some thoughts on that before we continue, brother Xiangyu.
I think you raised a lot of good points. Yeah.
All right, I guess we'll go to the next question of Comrade Fox. If you want to do the next question.
How is Mao Zedong appealing to his readers? Well, I think it's actually basically when I'm looking at how is he appealing to it. I think he's actually given a simple task ahead for everybody to do it. He's given the three choices what we can do. We can sit idly by, follow, or sit idly by, or follow, or oppose, or actually get out there and lead, and which actually flows from that previous question, because it stipulates that, I think in the third last paragraph, which starts on page 155. And he's obviously, we do need to reach out to the people and actually give them that guidance, that leadership and guidance to advance further. Instead, otherwise, we'll just actually, and it answers the previous question, because if it doesn't, they just go basically back to square one. It was an uprising, and that's all it was. They're back to square one again, and keep continuing. So, in order to advance from a lower to a higher stage, he's actually just put it there quite simply, and this is what this needs to happen. And I think it's a great little appeal there. This is, and he's described what he's been, actually had reports. This is what's happening. This is what we need to be out there. It's a challenge to the pre-existing order. This is where, when Marx and Engels mentioned this in the manifesto. This is against the pre-existing order. We need to be there, and we need to touch base, reach out, relate to them, and also provide that leadership in order to move to a higher level. Otherwise, it'd just be a fruitless exercise, through. And I think that's basically how it came about. That's how he's appealing to his readers. I think it's because he's actually actually said, basically, if there isn't happening, then the powers that be that they're opposing will just come back into control again in a different way. Actually, a lot worse than what they were originally doing.
Let's see. I'll go ahead and answer the last question so we can finish these questions. How is the writing style of Mao Zedong unique? And I believe we already answered this question. He is very straightforward, to the point, easy to understand, and he's a brilliant organizer, and brilliant general as far as that. And there's something, what's interesting about this piece, it's very, very hopeful. Essentially, this is the core argument that leads to the Chinese Communist Revolution. He's talking about, this peasant uprising, and what should communists do in, response to this, and how should they support the peasant uprising. It's eventually a peasant uprising, that takes power, that puts the Chinese, communists into power. But it doesn't start in one region. It doesn't stop in one region. It starts, and they just keep going, and they go to the next village, and they get stronger. They go to the next village, and they get stronger until they eventually take power. I mean, it's very beautiful. And this is the kernel, and this is the message that leads to that later success. Let's see. We'll just open up the floor. Any ideas before we go on to maybe respond to some of these comments?
Yep.
I think we've mentioned this many times, but be approachable don't like you know how he talks about if we go if we get too ahead of ourselves and we go into the monasteries and we destroy these destroy things because they remind us of these systems of oppression, then it's really easy for the reactionaries to just come and be like, see, look, these people, they don't care about your ancestors, like they're against ancestor worship because they're against like these sorts of like extreme forms of ancestor worship because they've turned their backs on their own ancestors, and which is like which is still to this day like a very serious kind of I want to say sin, but kind of like a sin in like Chinese society to just kind of like turn your back on your ancestors. But you know, it's kind of like it's like Trumpism. It's terrible, but it's a reaction to a lot of the self-righteous like pseudo leftism and like that we've seen like in the 2010s. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, I think if we had a genuine kind of opposition in this country, I don't think anybody like Trump would have really a chance at all.
Yeah, because I mean, he's saying, I mean, Trump wasn't a leftist. He wasn't a revolutionary. He was very reactionary. He is a racist. He you know, he's all that. He's everything that the anti-Trump people say he is, basically. But they need to. But the thing that really kind of annoys me is the establishment left and like the DSA types and like a lot of the synthetic left in general. They just they don't really self-reflect and ask why is it that Trump came to power. They're just like, oh, it's because the people who voted for him were just a lost cause to begin with. And it's like,
The Russians,
could it be
yeah,
because
go ahead.
Yeah, the Russians did it.
or that, but it's like, or could it be because like you're such a self-righteous prick that nobody wants to listen to you, and like it's done like the amazing thing about the fake left is this. They you know, if you read about how the pseudo left and like the what was kind of bred by the CIA is they created a because every revolutionary movement you have like the sort of the more angry side of it, the one that's filled with like rightful anger and justice and everything, but that needs to be balanced out with meeting the people's needs and like stability and construction and all that stuff. So a lot of times you have these people who are just obsessed with tear down, tear down, tear down. We want to bring the system down, which is fine, but it's like what are you going to replace it with? What do people hear when you act like that and you don't offer them solutions? You know, so it's like it's created a sort of like it's divorced the left from the working masses. That's kind of like the DSA types and like all sorts of like the various types of synthetic leftists, and then made them useful for the imperialists. And at the same time, what's really sinister about this is you now have like, you know, apolitical average Joes seeing these types of people acting the way they do in a way that like no normal person would like them. And then they're convinced that, oh, this is what leftism is. This is what communism is. Well, I want nothing to I want nothing to do with this stuff, if that's what it is. And then like and then what other options are you left with? Well, you have like you have the Democrats who have failed you, but then you have this guy who this guy Trump comes along and like he has a message. I don't agree with his message, but he has a message, and he's saying like some things that you might agree with, like, oh, look at those people, they suck. But he's saying they're leftists, but they're not leftists. But you know, he's kind of appealing to them by saying, hey, I agree with you. These radical liberals, you know, they've got to go.
Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that the rise of Trump and the far right has really coincided with the age of neoliberalism in the imperial core. Over the past 30 years, you know, despite our increased imperial output, you know, we're now in more countries than ever, you know, we've seen dramatic declines in quality of life for working people in this country. I mean, homelessness has gone up for the first time in like decades since 2018. You know, so I think when working people have these legitimate problems, and when people like the Democrats or these radical liberals come in with their judgmental attitudes and just basically bashing these people as slime balls and offering no real solutions, of course they're going to reach out and just for the hell of it say, hey, I'm going to try and vote for this guy Trump, you know.
And actually, the other thing I noticed how Trump's message was on some economic issues. I mean, if you're growing up in the Rust Belt, they call the Rust Belt US, but where years ago you had a good paying union job, in the steel mill or the car manufacturing, that, and we've suffered here too. We've seen a lot of 40 years of neoliberal policies to completely shutting everything down, decimating working class communities and regional and remote towns as well. The fact is, at the end of the day, he's come along saying, whoa, this is wrong. I want to bring back the jobs here and do this and do this. Now, this appeals straight away to people.
And now at the same time, though, a lot of those people, they are like racists. They are bigoted. There's no doubt about that. But it's like, if you don't fix them and Trump comes in, what's gonna happen? They're more emboldened. They don't have solutions to their problems. They've become little like puppets of Trump, and like they're clinging on to false hope. But now they're even more racist than they were before.
Exactly.
So who does this help? It helps nobody.
Yeah, and that's I think it's highly important to address the economic situation of all working people, because you're going to have a lot. Trump's not the only one. There's going to be someone else 10 times as worse is going to come along next time around. So God knows what it's like.
And as communists, we need to face, like, a lot of times, there is some knee-jerk reacting, like, saying the things that we're saying, but just saying, oh, they're, the people on the people are just saying, accusing them of being racist. No, they are. But the thing is, it's important to rectify that and to recognize that. But it's like, it's how is this going to be done? It's very difficult, but somebody has to do it. You're not going to realistically, I mean, if these people are in the majority, you're not going to have a revolution unless you somehow, if you don't need to win them all over, but you need to, like, at least neutralize, like, the most reactionary ones, and then win the other ones over, and win over the ones who can be won over. And then there's some people who will be won over simply because people around them are being won over, and then isolate the ones who just refuse to budge. But some people, they the attitude now is, if you're not ideologically pure, then I'm just going to denigrate you as a lost cause. You're totally ignorant. Fuck you. You're I want nothing to do with you.
I think it's quite important. I think it's just the first, all of us, we've got to take, like myself and many others, we've got that little bit of advantage. But for any other comrades out there, you'll have to take that first step. Might not be easy, but you really need to go out and just and start talking with people. I know it's going to be hard and difficult, and maybe I would suggest actually taking someone, two of you, out at least, so you can interact. But and obviously don't put yourself in danger either. But the fact is, you've got to take that initial first step sooner or later. You can't be sort of sitting back in with our little circles and that, because if we're not outreaching to these people, it's just going to continue on, and it's just going to get a lot worse. Yeah. So
most people, you'll find most people will have at least a few correct ideas. Unite with them where they are correct first. You become more approachable. Then you struggle with them where they are incorrect. Sometimes I'll talk to these every now and then. I have to talk to these like right-wing libertarian type people, and they're wrong about most things, quite frankly, but they have a better line on imperialism than like the establishment left. I mean, now they're not necessarily coming from the right places. They're just saying like, oh well, why should we have to spend our taxpayer money to help defend these brown people on the other side of the world? Like, America should just like pull out of these countries and fuck off. And like, and it's like, well, yeah, he's wrong about a lot of things, but he's right about one thing: how America should stop its military interventions and like interfering with other people's politics. Now, if you can unite on that issue, then you see, maybe you can kind of get him to challenge some of his views. Like, just in that sentence, I said challenge maybe one or two things, and if you succeed in getting that person to at least question some of his opinions on what he just said, then who knows? You go from there.
Let's see. We're approaching the end here. If people want to get in the comments, we might be able to have time for a few comments. Anybody watching Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to ask any of the panelists here a question. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Flame of Liberation. Please subscribe to them on YouTube, and also follow on Twitter. I'm not big on the things, but I just wanted to read this comment from them. Let's see. There can be uprisings, but they don't have revolutionary leadership. They might not lead to anything positive. The huge Black Lives Matter uprising last year was a case of that. And, I think he is largely right, but not completely. There was some concessions given to these mass revolts. Very small concessions. We're talking limited amounts, more body cams, more limited police presences, even a change in the talk around police brutality. We've also seen, the way they've responded is very interesting. You've noticed how after the revolts, they started implementing like critical race theory within the upper elements of academia and the military and industrial complex. And critical race theory, which has very, radical roots, mind you, it's not scientific socialism, or even Black nationalism or Chicano nationalism. I would call it a critical but liberal ideology. But the watered down version of it which is being put out in higher levels of academia and even the military industrial complex and corporations, is a direct response to these mass revolts. And they're basically trying to rebrand themselves as less racist. They're kind of like the opposite of Trump, which was, largely controlled opposition, in my understanding. And they're trying to rebrand themselves to make imperialism look less racist, even though it's, doing this. So we get back to his point. As far as Black Lives Matter, I think, like a lot of our movements, what started out as largely a Black nationalist sentiments. If you go back to the earlier spontaneous uprisings in this country, even go back to the 1992 riots, or more recently with Trayvon Martin, I think the initial, and Ferguson especially, the initial response was a proletarian Black nationalism. And they were able to manipulate and co-op, the Black Lives Matter as a national organization, and try to push it into the Democratic camp. And now we see Biden in the power, who Biden is an openly, I honestly think Biden is an openly racist person, at least going back into, busing and segregation. I mean, Kamala calls him out as his past as an openly racist person. But his policies are racism and white supremacy just done more effectively in comparison to Trump. I raised a lot of ideas and issues there. Anybody want to respond to our comrade at Flame of Liberation?
Yeah, I just, obviously, I don't know if you all heard, but there's some questions with the Black Lives Matter leadership. One of I think she's now the former chair or something like that. Basically, she got like $1 million book deal since joining Black Lives Matter. She's now she's wealthy. I think there's just some questions about, obviously Black Lives Matter is a very important movement, and I don't look to like denigrate it or anything like that, but I think we do need to have some questions as to why it failed to really bring about significant change. There were some concessions made. I know some police departments, they said they were going to, draw down their funding and things like that, but a lot of things that they said they were going to do during the heat of the protests have since been rescinded.
Yeah.
So, obviously without political leadership that was willing to go, all the way, I think it's really, it's very hard to really accomplish anything.
Without a mass movement, without revolutionary leadership, a lot of times the spontaneous expressions of rightful anger will be used in service of the ruling class to some extent. I mean, uh, the the protests were right. They were completely justified. But what cannot be denied is that it was the Democratic Party did co-opt them to a certain extent and try to like, it's not, I'm not saying like, oh, it was like led in secret like in a dark room by, what I'm saying is, well, since there's this sort of mass anger and there's like there's a lack of a truly revolutionary mass movement, then it was easy for the Democratic Party to come in and kind of attempt to kind of channel that rage towards, getting Biden elected. And I mean, Trump was already kind of screwed because of the way he handled the pandemic, but it was kind of it was almost like a sort of color revolution in a way. How like you have like you take existing anger and then you try to hijack it to try to serve your own political ends. That's kind of what it happens with all mass protests in America or anywhere.
Actually, this is great because I think it's something we've always got to be stressed on. And I mean, BLM was very important what they did and what lessons to be learned. And I think how we can actually change things from lower to higher levels of struggle. Look, I'm heavily involved in the trade union movement as both myself as an organiser and a boilermaker by trade. But the fact is, trade union struggle within itself has got limitations. It's only within the system. Maybe get and the struggle to achieve some concessions or some mild changes, but won't change the system itself from all the economic basis. And this is some lessons we've learned. And yes, I agree. I could actually completely relate when it's hijacked or railroaded by the imperial, by the ruling class, through a political party, be it with the Democrats. We have similar here with the Labor Party, although it's a different historical roots altogether. But how struggle is then just garnered into voting someone into government. And that was all it. And it's just left to be and thinking hopefully we'll have a nice smiley government again and they'll do some great things for us, and which they won't. We all know that. But I think this is some of the painful lessons we need to come to realise. I think everyone needs to realise we keep going down this path. It just becomes a futile exercise. And really we need to actually have a new direction in life to actually obviously fundamentally change the system. And also out of this, we have to learn we have to do more than just change a government. We have to change the system. And that's why that gives rise to all these problems in the first place. It's good to have all these people, even if you do have a lot of people with good intentions going in there, and even if they get elected, but they're going to be hamstrung with what they can actually do at the end of the day because they're still caught up within the capitalist superstructure. We do need to get back on the changes. So some of these lessons have to be learnt. They might have won some concessions at the meantime, but that'll be easily reneged any time. As Brother Bill McKay wrote, there's a great little book to read, Brother Bill McKay, how they organised the United Auto Workers Union there in Detroit back in the 30s. But he had it all saying, what's given to us now will always be taken off us. And that happens to be the case. What's given to us has always been taken off us. So do we still want to keep going around that ditch, or we want to move forward in a different direction? This is what's facing everybody in all the respective countries. It's a good question, actually, and it's good discussion.
So we're coming to the end. So let's do a round of final thoughts. We'll start with Brother Carlos. What is something, and you can also make any plugs for any work you're doing as well. Just what are your final thoughts on this discussion to wrap up?
It was great discussing this with all of you. Definitely a really interesting topic, and I think relevant to a lot of the problems that the American left and communists really need to grapple with moving forward. Specifically, basically finding a way to meet working class people where they are and effectively organizing them, and I think some of the discussion we just had, regarding Black Lives Matter, I think it just demonstrates that, look, without strong political and economic leadership, forces within the current economic system will co-opt your movement. The non-profit industrial complex, which I like to call it, radical liberal academics, they're there for a reason, and I think it's it's basically to co-opt movements. I think that's why there's such a big force right now. It's such a big problem for the left. So great discussion. It was nice meeting you, Xiangyu. Sorry, I'm probably messing up your name really bad.
It's close enough. The X makes like a sh sound. It's kind of like the X in Xi Jinping's name is like Xi Jinping, and it's not like G or Xi Jinping. Yeah, Xiangyu.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so my bad.
That's fine.
Xiangyu. Okay, let's see. Brother Fox, if you want to give your final statement.
Well, I think there's been some great lessons learned today as well, how we can learn from lower levels of struggle developing into a higher level of struggle. And I think it's how we're going to apply that, how we're going to apply scientific socialism to our respective conditions of our countries, because it's the material conditions that we're currently under we need to operate under, and how we're going to apply it effectively. I just want to make a little comment. Someone else wrote here about supernatural world and religion, etc. Well, I mean, our ideas and beliefs are determined by our material surrounds, right? That's all material conditions. It's not the other way around. So as material conditions change, so will our ideas and our beliefs as well will change accordingly. I mean, the Christian church currently, as we know it, was totally different 1,000 years ago. Even early Christianity was completely different from what it is now. That is just in class. It's changed because of the economic material conditions change over accordingly over time, from feudalism to capitalism, and sure, it will change under socialism. So, I mean, look, some old things will disappear. Some things go out of being. Some things come into being. It's just a natural order of the world, but that's what happens. So I hope they try to change that up. And same with some old traditions as well. Some old traditions will eventually disappear as material conditions change, but new ones will come into place as well. It's just that's the way it has been. I'll just give you something. Australia now it's totally different from the Australia of 1st of January 1901. It was totally different to what the land continent was about 3,000 years ago. Everything's in a consistent state of change.
And it's not just a matter of like a few people believing, having certain beliefs. It's more of an issue of how these sort of societal beliefs dictate the way that society is run. It's kind of like the relationship between the base and the superstructure. That's kind of the way you should look at it.
I'm scared to say your name now because I think I gotta. So you said it's like Xi Jinping. So Xiangyu, is that
Xiangyu, like that?
Xiangyu,
Just pretend the X is an SH.
Xiangyu. Okay, brother Xiangyu. If any final thoughts, or if you also want to plug your Twitter, his Twitter handle there is @NotXiangyu. Go ahead, brother.
Here, wait, hold on. Here, yeah. If you haven't read Mao, I highly recommend reading his works. I highly recommend On the Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People. That's a very good one. Also on contradiction, on practice.
Yes.
And if you go on my Twitter, my pinned tweet is like a suggested reading of kind of it's like a basic like Marxist Leninist kind of study guide, almost like the readings you should do. And another thing is if you want to understand the basics of like Marxist-Leninist political economy, there is this book called The Fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism that was published in the Soviet Union. It was published in the 60s by I think the main author was I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. It's this Finnish guy named Kuusinen. But just ignore the parts that have like the Khrushchevite revisionism. I feel like he just had to pay lip service to Khrushchev because of the era that was published. But he was it's just like a basic understanding, but really study Mao to understand not just like the Marxist-Leninist theory, but to just kind of how to not be a dumbass and how to relate to people in a way such that they actually want to listen to you.
Powerful. So if I can just kind of conclude here and we'll do our chant afterwards. I think what I said in my last Anti-Imperialist America blog was very powerful about that quote from Marx, is that communists should go everywhere and anywhere where they see people that are reacting to the contradictions within the imperialist system. Wherever there's people mad about national oppression, like in Black Lives Matter, wherever people are mad about treatment on the job and the grassroots labor organizing struggles, wherever people are mad at the patriarchy, or wherever people are mad at being discriminated against the job, for our trans brothers and sisters, and so forth. Wherever people are coming into these contradictions, we should be there. And when we go there, we raise the economic question. We raise what they understand. We develop on their understanding. We don't go out to people and find the symbols that they like, or find aspects in their culture, and attack it. We don't go out and burn the American flag in front of them, or tell them they have to take down the American flag from their house, or if it's not harming anyone at the time, correct their language. We say, you're oppressed. This is the system you're going against. And from that, we can lead people in the direction of higher material development and social development. Marxists are looking to develop at all aspects of society, economically and socially. But you got to be tactful about it. We're not, and I think that's about it. Get out there, talk to your neighbors, and organize, comrades. So if people want to repeat it, put their fist up in the air and repeat after me, we'll call it a night. Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to
win.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
All power.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.